Hi, everyone. So we're going to put everybody at home. Well, we first want to say welcome, everyone, to GW4W's Wine and Tea Wednesdays. Delighted to be here with everyone. One little tiny thing that I just want to share. I was watching a documentary on the suffragette movement, both in the UK and in the United States, and they were showing these pictures. So there was a picture from 1910 of women holding up signs saying equal pay for equal work. And here we are, still working for that. So we owe a lot. We owe a lot to these amazing women from all these different backgrounds that fought to get us where we are today. But clearly we still have work to do. So on that note, I'm going to pass the conversation over to Chris Andrews, London lead for GW4W and the CEO of Personal Touch Fitness.
Thank you, Min. Today, as my co-host, we have Deanne Johnson. Thank you for joining today, Deanne, and being co-host with me. She's the womanologist, master coach to women in leadership. She's also a GW4W member. Thank you again, Deanne. Our guest today is Magdalena Bak-Meier. She is founder and director of Make Time Count. We are going to have an amazing conversation about burnout, women leadership, and she's going to give us some tips as well. So here we go with a fantastic conversation. I'm going to start out, Magdalena, and I'm going to ask you, no matter what our background is, we have all been impacted by the pandemic. How has COVID impacted you? What I mean by that, how did you think and feel? Okay. And then also to add on to that, how did it impact your work?
Right. Okay. So, COVID hit me the same way as everyone, very unexpectedly. I've been watching one of these comedy shows in Britain where, I too thought it was something happening somewhere in China. And it was somewhere else, and it wasn't going to be on my doorstep. And then it appeared. And I would say that it was a shock, for sure. I have a medical condition that puts me on a very vulnerable list of people. So I had to isolate. I actually had to isolate from my family as well, because my partner was still working. Our daughter was still in school. And so in terms of their contacts, they became my biggest risk. So we live actually in two separate flats anyways, but it's meant that for a period of probably about 12 weeks or so, I was really on my own. And that was not easy, although I guess my training and, when you do a PhD is very lonely when you do a lot of work and you're a scholar and a researcher and so on, it's quite lonely. So you're always out on the limb by yourself. So in a way, I kind of went, okay, I can do this. But it was tough. It was tough, in terms of, I think personally working like on a border of therapeutic work and coaching work and leadership work. When we're in a kind of crisis, and it certainly happened for me, all of the deep fears we have come up to the surface. All the things we really thought, our little critics that said, yeah, you should have gotten this right. Why didn't you do this? Everything seems to be a good idea that you kind of just didn't have time to do, or just put down the list of priorities. So I experienced all of that. So I have a long sort of standing journaling practice. I've been keeping a journal for 22 years now. So it's a very
Is it a written, you do handwritten journal?
I do handwritten, and I encourage all clients I work with to do handwriting work. And also scientists I work with as well, when they draft ideas, we always do standing handwritten work. So that has really brought me face to face with dealing with a lot of things about death, about my connection to my family, about my purpose in the world, about how I feel, and just all the emotional up and downs, you know, of change and psychological response to change. So I don't think I really got angry. I've heard other people get quite angry at other people. I guess I come at the world from a very compassionate place. So I felt, you know, we're all having a human response, and some people will be in denial, and that's fine. And some people will be sad they're not seeing their friends, and they'll break the rules, as some of our notorious people did in Britain. And so, you know, and hey, why not? It's a human response. You know, we have needs to be loved and so on. So, you know, so fair enough. In terms of the way it impacted my business, it was quite a striking, fast impact, because the work I do, the study, the development of my models and so on, is self-funded. And so my work feeds that, and a lot of my work is delivery in person, or teaching in person, or facilitation of groups, or going as a consultant into places. And so those contracts all went on hold, or were stopped, or were sort of put into the kind of non-renewal, because of the sort of need to kind of just, everyone was in shock and panic. So, I mean, I think that was normal. On the other hand, I do, for my own ability to research and understand the models I'm developing, run my one-to-one practice, which is private. And so I still had all my clients who wanted to see me and needed to see me. And in fact, as COVID continued, more people across companies were reaching out through the network to say, can you please work with me? So in a way, my private practice has grown, but not too much, because I've kept time to do other things, if you see what I mean. I divide my time between a number of different hats. But yeah, it's been an interesting, and I still feel that in questions such as my relationship with, you know, death of loved ones, and so on, I still have not bottomed any of that out. I think one thing I really became very somatically aware of was what it means to be imprisoned. And so that was very interesting. You know, what does it mean to really be grounded in a place where you sort of you're told you can't move? And I had, you know, colleagues and friends in France, for example, where they were really told you can't even be on the street at all, and that idea of lockdown, this kind of top-down way of limiting liberties, it was really quite tough.
I'm excited to see what you do with that, because that's such a powerful insight, and it would be interesting to see how that evolves and starts to impact your work going forward, and maybe projects come out of that. That's such a passionate, powerful thing. You talk a lot about burnout. You talk a lot about burnout in your work. So I'm wondering, is it true that burnout is a big thing? And if it is, how do you define it? How do we know what it is? What are some of the symptoms around burnout?
It is a big thing. It isn't new. The reason why I talk about it is that one of my key models for healthy human function has been a result of a longitudinal, like a long-term study of a leadership program where some people were burning out. So being, I guess, you know, a researcher, a curious person, I was curious, why was this happening? And so I come to it from a phenomenological point of view of seeing people, wow, they're having this. I have had burnout myself. And so it fits into my frame of the world, like how I'm trying to understand how human beings work and how I can connect the theory with the practice. And so, you know, in looking at that, I went back to the 1960s. So actually burnout was defined in the 1960s by a psychologist, in fact, And it was kind of observed that people were all of a sudden having an emotional exhaustion, a level of cynicism, particularly in the caring industries, you know, where you had teachers and carers and nurses, people who gave a lot. And that this was a phenomenon. And he just began to see, he goes, look, it's happening everywhere you look. People are having this, that, you know.
Question, did he do this because you said caregivers? And we know that a lot of those professions are, frankly, it's women that go into a lot of those professions. Did he break it apart by gender when he did that? Or was it just more?
No, not to my knowledge. In fact, because to be fair, in the 1960s, when this was happening, the impetus for looking at burnout was actually through corporate America. So it was more about men, if that makes sense. It was definitely more about men. And the chap I have in mind is Herbert Fredenberger, who did that work. But that work was then picked up by a scholar from Berkeley, who did more work on looking at carers, because I think as an academic, you wouldn't be going to a corporate environment. You'd be probably looking more to places where you could go easily and start to collect interviews and get your data from. And again, I think hospital nurses and carers would be more willing to give you time, even if they were burnt out already. So, you know, and that's Christina Maslach from Berkeley. And then her work was really sort of beginning to show the kind of index. And in many ways, when I teach burnout, I go back to the original Herbert's work, because it kind of shows you the steps we go through in burnout. And because I'm a neuroscientist by my training, I look and know a lot about brain plasticity, so our ability to relearn, and at the same time, this beautiful quality, which is that the brain habituates to experience. And so when we have a certain experience and we get used to it, it becomes our new normal. And what struck me about the ladder of burnout was the fact that our nervous system, a little change day on day would happen. And you would go down these dark steps of burnout without knowing you were getting yourself into danger. And and so that became for me really powerful from a psychoeducational point of view, that, you know, if the mind is beautifully conscious, so if you give it information that says, this is happening, then the mind has you know, some sort of an arsenal to sort of go, oh my gosh, this is happening to me. And so you can start to, you know, it's almost like going to a doctor and the doctor says, listen, your blood pressure is way too high, or your sugar levels are abnormal, you might be diabetic. It's that kind of evidence-based way of seeing where you might be. That's not to say that people are not in denial of burnout.
So I'm just curious about why we don't recognize that we're actually going down that path. So you said that we don't necessarily, we start stepping down the path, but we're not aware that we're doing it. So it's kind of like walking towards the cliff but can't see the edge.
That's definitely my experience, Mim. I see it in the women that come to me, that often it's when you take a history, little things have been happening over a long time, and then they're right on the edge, or they've fallen into burnout. It's something that's insidious, right? So what's going on with that?
My sense is, because like you, I will take a client history, is that, you know, what really is burnout? I mean, burnout is a prolonged exposure to stress that becomes chronic, where the nervous system, by which I mean not just the nervous system as in your brain, but your whole neuroendocrine system, the way your nervous system connects to your hormones, to your muscles, becomes depleted over time to a level that progressively starts to not allow you to feel you've got the resources to respond. And because the nervous system is kind of at a broad level divided into that sort of, let me scan my environment, let me see if I can respond to my opportunities, let me see if I'm in danger, what tends to happen is effectively is people separate and become more cognitive. And this is part of my sort of fascination, is about how people separate from their humanity, from their embodied self, from their deeper spiritual purpose, from their connection through the heart, into what I call a mind on legs, which is basically this very cognitive, robot-like person. And this is, to me, one of the ways in which the mind tries to run ahead of itself, of the rest of the embodied person, tries to solve problems, and eventually hits a wall. Because in spiritual work we would hit a wall, because it's unnatural. It's like the rest of the body should have been resourcing it too. I think you've asked me about what the symptoms are. So some of the symptoms I see in real burnout, because real burnout is not just a mild tiredness. You know, we all can work very hard, and there are times when you need a day to recover. If you need a day to recover, you're okay. Like, just, you know, go recover and you're fine. But what happens when you are under chronic stress for very long periods of time is you're depleting emotionally, you're depleting physically, you're depleting cognitively. And at some point you find yourself down this staircase where you are, in fact, one of Herbert's steps was the use of substances to keep yourself going, which is how we get into the whole bit of addiction. And
it was a really interesting, one of our other, I forget who it was, but one of the speakers talked about addiction being the disconnect with self.
Yes.
So that ties exactly. So that very profound.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, when you do that, you're powering, it's almost like having a debt, financial debt, and going and getting a credit card. And you know, you're just getting into more debt, but you're hoping that somehow, you know, maybe, I don't know, 5 cups of coffee, maybe, you know, cocaine, whatever people will use will be what gets them through. And there is that kind of high octane culture that particularly, I think I tend to work with sort of, you know, if I work with humanitarians or people who are doctors or nurses or teachers, they clearly are not in that high octane through a point of promotions and high quality of life and all of those sorts of factors. But their passion and their almost emotional and kind of ethical level of responsibility is actually out of balance with their own resources. So we get a kind of a boundary problem, psychological boundary problem. But for people in corporates, it's often a fallout of a cultural way of working, where people feel they have to match what they perceive is what is expected. And, you know, and this has happened. I mentor 2 young women who are in the sort of, you know, big corporate world. And it's been very interesting to watch, because they're, you know, they were in their 20s when I became their mentor, and they sort of are taking on this expectation of, I have to run a triathlon, I have to do this or that, and, you know, I have to look a certain way, achieve. And this idea that I can pull away from this makes it look like I'm weak, I'm not capable. And so in terms of diversity, it's really, you know, the article I'm writing with my academic colleague at the moment is very much about looking at science, about who decides these rules, who says that is the template that we have to be following. But maybe there's an alternative template.
I think that the playing field is wide open for an alternative narrative right now. And, you know, and then there's just such a wide gap, isn't there, between what we are beginning to know for sure about what we need to be well and what the culture is expecting of us. So there is this big dissonance, and it'll be interesting to see how we actually go about creating resonance between the data that about wellness and cultural expectations.
Well, and I think just to add on to that, it's interesting that for those of us that have been corporate health and well-being and benefits design for years, you know, we've been doing stress management classes in the corporate environment since the late 80s. Clearly, that hasn't worked. You know, the data shows that. So there is that balance. You know, you talk about coaching, because I know, you know, with all of you coaching individuals, there's that piece of it. What do I need? But the bigger discussion around the workplace, and particularly from our perspective on the gender side of it, is how do you build a work culture where people can not just survive, but truly thrive with their whole selves. And so I think that from what I've seen, that little bit of burnout, and again, you're the researcher, but being able to define that from a research perspective, it's not what we think we see, but here's the actual data, and then turning it into real action steps in these cultures can start to shift some of that. So I'd be curious, and I know this wasn't, how much autonomy do you think the people that you are coaching actually have in their own culture? Or is it, I mean, I know you can put the mask on.
Wow, man, big question.
Yeah.
Very big.
Particularly for women. And I think that, you know, this is who we are. So that's why I'm curious as to what you've seen with the corporate women that you've worked with.
I think there is both autonomy and a lot of expectation of conformity. So what I see is that, and the data bears this out. I mean, you know, I don't sit there all day and write, you know, report papers. I work with people, but the data, certainly if I look, shows that, and in my leadership programs, when I was running leadership programs in companies, there's a problem with women wanting to take on leadership roles, so they opt out. And they opt out because this model for some of them just does not fit them. It feels like a model where it is supposed to replicate what a man can do.
Yeah.
And it does not respect what women could and perhaps should do, because we are women, which is very different. I've seen this certainly in my own career early on, and then it's one of the reasons why I changed careers, because I felt it was just too, you know, it was too prescriptive, and it was very shocking to the level to which my activity would be controlled. And I think it's not something that I look at kindly. That kind of level of conformism and manipulation, because I think it kills diversity and creativity, and it kills human spirit, frankly. So I don't think it's a good way to go. So the data seems to support that. It does. It takes huge courage. Yeah. So I would say that the women I've worked with, it's really interesting, because even I'm thinking of two at the moment who have been signed off for burnout, have taken the break, have tried to start to go down the path of thinking, I just have to leave because clearly I don't cut it, had all the stories of how they were squeezed out and not promoted and so on. So there's all of that repetition and discrimination, frankly. And at the same time, I've been able to work with them to help them recover and go back into their own workplaces and start to change them. So it was really interesting how the companies do value them enough to say, oh, it's okay, take any time you need, it's all right, you know, we do value you. But if you don't change fundamentally in terms of what you believe you have the right to, then you will go back just as you were. So there's a really deep personal leadership work that has to happen with women, so they are able to feel I have the right to to be well. I mean, you
and
know,
I'm worth it.
and I'm worth it. Yeah.
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 My God, what you're talking about is such a powerful thing. And, you know, it goes to what we were talking about before we went live about how there is this, you know, academic, scientific approaches really work and are necessary, but so is the spiritual side, the understanding of who I am, my value and my worth. Like the way forward requires a rounded approach, a holistic approach, because because it takes personal leadership as well as global leadership for us to shift the needle on all of this.
Well, and what's your moral, ethical core as a leader? Yeah. And I think in this world that we're in right now, I think it's one of the things that when, you know, some of the research, we always talk about this head, heart, hands model, which,
which comes
from Harvard. That's Harvard Business School. That's Professor Beer. But we love that concept because again, it's that, you know, as a leader, yes, you have to have the data. Yes, you have to be very smart, but how deeply connected is it to empathy and to caring and real compassion? And the realization that not any one of us has all the answers. And so hands for us is about how you connect with others. And I think that women, from the research that we've shared on a couple of different things, this ability for us to build consensus when we're at our best and build these really inclusive teams, that there's the business case for this. And so if you're burnt out, your capacity to do that as a leader, you just don't have it. And yet it's this great gift that you're bringing into businesses, and not just a gift, like there's some financial benefits to doing this, which I think businesses should embrace. If they're a little skeptical, you know, there's some good data around this.
Without doubt, this is an issue that really needs a lot of attention. Could do with a lot more conversation too today, but we've run out of time. Like, there's so much more that we could delve into with this.
Yes.
But there's so many people watching via Facebook. I'd like to say hi to everyone watching. Leave questions, we'll come back to them. But Magdalena, before we end, give us a couple of tips as to what people can do to prevent burnout or even manage it, you know, if they're in the different phases of life.
Right. I would say please do the following two things. Take what's you know, Paul Gilbert calls compassionate mindfulness, and give yourself 5 minutes a day to just be true to what you need. You need. It's so simple. It's a sort of, you can be a carer, and women are carers naturally, you know, it's what biology gives us. So if you're not honoring your own needs, then that's really, really important. I would also say, if you haven't, which probably the whole world hasn't yet, take a look on Amazon at my book, Get Productive Grit, because I think this little idea of putting self-care at the heart of work and life and your career is a really transforming idea. I need the help of many women to help me take it forward. But it is something that, you know, really changes how you run each day, how you run your team, how you show up, because we all have to have a core of self-care. And self-care gets a little bit of lip service, but it's not been, to my knowledge, incorporated into the work-life balance education in its main form. And I think it's important. And for women, particularly because I work with quite a few women now, I would say the same goes for professional development in your career. Make time for that. So it's a kind of personal self-care and a professional self-care, because it is easy to be, Dawn, you were talking about this larger system. The larger system is still patriarchal and very man-like. And so in order to really be a healthy leader as a woman, it's important that you look after your professional development and then are able to do that for others and with others, but not from a place of wound, that you got burned out and that you paid the cost and that you're a victim and so on, but from a healthy, beautiful place. And so I feel like I am now working with a generation of new female leaders who can get to the top without that wound.
Yeah.
And that's really important.
Great work.
That's beautiful.
Amazing
Beautiful.
aspiration.
Yeah. So I'm going to wrap it up by saying thank you so much, Magdalena, for sharing
Thank you.
all that. And I definitely agree. We need, as women of all ages, all level, we need to work together and pull together and go there strong and not from a wound, being wounded. It is about being strong. And that's what GW4W is all about. We're
healthy, not just strong, but healthy.
Healthy.
I think sometimes we think of strength and then we negate the health part. So
exactly.
You can't be strong if you're not healthy.
Absolutely. So next week, I'm going to ask everyone to join us again for our next Wine and Tea Wednesday. We're going to have Amino. She's the founder and CEO of Diverse Cultures. We'll be talking about leadership and well-being in organizations. So come join us then next week, same time. If you haven't done so already, please download our white paper on gw4w.org. If you need any support during this time, please reach out to us. We have so many different people from diverse backgrounds, different levels. We would like to help and support you. So with all that, thank you again, Magdalena. And remember,
great time, sip together.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Yeah.